The sun didn't just beat down on the Mojave frontier, it punished. It stripped moisture from skin, cracked lips until they bled, and turned the air itself into something you had to fight to breathe. Alara Voss had stopped fighting 3 hours ago. She didn't remember falling the first time, or the second. By the third, her knees just buckled and stayed down, her palms pressing into sand so hot it could brand flesh. The stagecoach, what was left of it, lay 2 days behind her, a splintered skeleton picked clean by men with guns and dead eyes. They'd taken the strongbox, the horses, the driver's life. They'd left her with nothing but the dress on her back and a canteen with a bullet hole through its side. Now even the dress was more dust than fabric. Keep moving. The thought was automatic, meaningless. Her body had its own ideas. It wanted to curl into the sand, let the heat finish what dehydration had started. But some stubborn part of her, the part that had survived a childhood of nothing, a father who drank himself into the ground, and 3 years scraping by in a St. Louis boarding house, refused to give the desert that satisfaction. She dragged 1 foot forward, then stopped, not because she wanted to, because her legs simply quit. Alara's vision tunneled. The horizon tilted sideways, and she had just enough time to think, well, this is stupid, before the ground rushed up to meet her face. Rowan Cade wasn't a religious man, but he believed in patterns. Cattle grazed in patterns. Storms built in patterns. Even the violence that occasionally rolled through these parts followed a certain rhythm. You could see it coming if you knew what to look for. What he didn't expect to find was a woman, half dead, sprawled in the dirt like something the wind had forgotten. He'd been tracking a wounded coyote for the better part of an hour, following blood drops in the sand, when his horse stopped short. The mare's ears swiveled forward, nostrils flaring. Rowan's hand went to the rifle on his saddle before his eyes found what had spooked her. At first, he thought it was a discarded blanket, maybe a dead animal. Then he saw the shape of a hand, fingers curled like a bird's claw, and his stomach dropped. He swung down from the saddle, boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. Approached slow. You learned quick out here that dead and plain dead could look the same until one of them shot you. But this woman wasn't playing anything. She lay on her side, face turned away from the sun like that might save her. Her dress, once probably a decent traveling outfit, was shredded at the hem, stained with God knew what. Her hair, dark and matted, stuck to her neck and shoulders. He could see the rise and fall of her rib cage, shallow and irregular. Still breathing, barely. Rowan crouched down, keeping a careful distance. "Ma'am?" Nothing. He reached out, touched 2 fingers to her wrist. Her pulse was there, thready and weak, but there. Her skin burned under his hand, not just from sun, but fever. "Damn it," he muttered. He should leave her. That was the smart play. Out here, you minded your business and kept your head down. Taking in strays, especially ones that looked like trouble, was how you ended up with a bullet in your back or your ranch burned to the ground. And this woman? She had trouble written all over her, the kind that came with questions he didn't want to answer. But even as he thought it, he was already sliding his arms under her shoulders and knees, lifting her with a grunt. She weighed almost nothing, too little. Her head lolled against his chest, and up close, he could see the cracked lips, the sunburn blistering across her cheekbones, the way her breathing hitched like every inhale hurt. "You better not die on me," he told her, knowing she couldn't hear him. "I don't need that kind of mess." He settled her across his saddle as gently as he could manage, then swung up behind her, one arm braced around her waist to keep her from sliding. The mare shifted under the extra weight, but didn't protest. The ride back to the ranch took 40 minutes. Rowan spent most of it trying not to think about what he was doing, why he was doing it, or what kind of hell this decision might bring down on him. The ranch house sat low and stubborn against the landscape, built from adobe and timber that had weathered 20 years of sandstorms and summer heat. It wasn't much, 2 rooms, a cellar, a barn out back, but it was his, bought with money he'd earned breaking his back on other men's land until he'd saved enough to buy his own. He carried the woman inside, kicked the door shut with his heel, and laid her out on the bed in the back room. It was the only bed. He'd be sleeping on the floor tonight, apparently. For a moment he just stood there, looking down at her. In the dim light filtering through the shutters, she looked younger than he'd first thought. Mid-20s, maybe. Her face, beneath the damage, had a certain sharpness to it. High cheekbones, a mouth that probably had opinions when it wasn't busy dying. "All right," he said to the empty room. Water first. He grabbed the pitcher from the kitchen, poured a cup, then returned to the bedside. Sliding a hand under her head, he tilted it up and brought the cup to her lips. "Come on," he murmured. "Don't make me do this the hard way." A few drops slipped past her lips. She choked, coughed weakly, but didn't wake. He tried again, slower this time, letting the water seep in bit by bit. Her throat worked reflexively, swallowing. Good enough. He set the cup aside and assessed the rest of the damage. The fever was the biggest problem. He fetched a basin of cool water and a rag, then set about wiping down her face, her neck, her arms. The sunburn was angry and raw. He'd have to make a poultice for that. And she'd need food once she could keep it down. Broth, maybe. Something easy. Hours passed. Rowan worked methodically. The way he did everything. No wasted motion, no second guessing. He cleaned her wounds, wrapped the worst of the blisters, coaxed more water down her throat. When the fever spiked, he stripped off the torn dress, keeping his eyes on his work, professional, detached, and wrapped her in a clean sheet, then kept the cool cloths coming until the shaking eased. By the time night fell, he was exhausted. He slumped in the chair beside the bed, arms crossed, watching the shallow rise and fall of her breathing. "You got a name?" he asked the unconscious woman. Silence. Figured. He leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. Just for a minute, he told himself. Then he'd check on the livestock, make sure the barn was secured. He woke 6 hours later to the sound of ragged breathing and a voice, thin and cracked, whispering words he couldn't make out. Alara surfaced slowly, dragging herself up from somewhere deep and dark. Everything hurt. Her throat felt like she'd swallowed glass. Her skin burned in places and ached in others, and her head pounded with a rhythm that matched her pulse. She tried to open her eyes. Failed. Tried again. The world appeared in slices, ceiling beams, rough cut and dark. Walls the color of dried clay. A window with shutters that didn't quite close. Not the desert. Not dead. Where? Easy. The voice came from her left, low and steady. She turned her head, slowly, because fast made the room spin, and found a man sitting in a chair beside the bed. He looked like he'd been carved out of the same hard-packed earth as the walls. Broad shoulders, sun-weathered skin, dark hair that needed a cut. His eyes, watching her, were the color of winter sky. "Water," she croaked. He didn't ask questions, just reached for the cup on the bedside table and brought it to her lips. She drank greedily, too fast, and started coughing. He pulled the cup back. "Slower," he said. She wanted to argue, but her lungs were too busy trying to remember how to work. When the coughing fit passed, he offered the cup again. This time she sipped, forcing herself to go easy, even though every cell in her body screamed for more. When the cup was empty, he set it aside and sat back. "How do you feel?" "Like hell ran me over twice and backed up to make sure." His mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "That's about right." Alara closed her eyes, trying to piece together what had happened. The stagecoach, the attack, running, walking, crawling, then nothing. "You found me," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah." "Where?" "About 8 miles west of here. You were face down in the dirt." "Sounds about right." She opened her eyes again, studying him. "Why'd you bring me back?" He was quiet for a moment, and she got the sense he was asking himself the same question. Seemed like the thing to do. Most people out here don't do things just because they seem right. Most people aren't me. Fair enough. She tried to sit up. Her arms shook, refused to cooperate. The man, she still didn't know his name, leaned forward, slid a hand under her shoulders, and helped her into a sitting position. He propped pillows behind her back, then stepped away like he was worried about getting too close. "What's your name?" she asked. "Rowan Cade." "Alara Voss." He nodded, filing it away. "You were on the stage that got hit 2 days back." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. 3 days. They killed the driver. Took everything that wasn't nailed down. Left me because... She stopped, swallowed. "I don't know why they left me." "You got lucky." "Doesn't feel like it." Rowan pulled the chair closer and sat down again, elbows resting on his knees. "You remember anything about them? The men who attacked you? Alara's jaw tightened. She remembered every detail. The way the leader had smiled when he shot the driver. The cold efficiency with which they'd ransacked the luggage. The moment one of them had looked at her, really looked, and she'd thought, but then the leader had said something, low and sharp, and they'd left her standing there in the dust while they rode off with everything she owned. 5 men, she said, maybe 6. The leader had a scar across his left eye. Talked like he'd spent time back east. Well-educated. Which made it worse somehow. Rowan's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or worry. You know him, Alara said. I know of him. Name's Garrett Finch, runs a gang that's been working this territory for the past year. They hit stages, supply wagons, anyone foolish enough to travel alone. He paused. They don't usually leave witnesses. The weight of that settled over the room like a blanket. So why am I still breathing? Alara asked. That's the question, isn't it? She thought about it, turning the pieces over in her mind. Maybe they figured I'd die out there anyway. Easier than a bullet. Maybe. But he didn't sound convinced, and neither was she. Over the next 3 days, Alara learned the rhythms of Rowan's ranch. He woke before dawn, worked until his hands bled, came back when the sun set, and spoke only when he had something worth saying. He wasn't cruel, wasn't cold, just careful. Like he'd learned the hard way that words had weight, and he didn't waste them. She, on the other hand, was trapped in bed, useless, and climbing the walls. The fever broke on the 2nd day, leaving her weak but clear-headed. By the 3rd, she could sit up without help and keep down solid food. Progress, but not enough. I need to get out of this bed, she told Rowan on the morning of the 4th day. He looked up from the stove where he was frying eggs that smelled better than anything she'd eaten in months. You need to rest. I've been resting. I'm losing my mind. Give it another day. I'll give it another hour, and then I'm walking out of here whether you like it or not. He studied her for a long moment, then sighed. You're stubborn. You say that like it's a bad thing. Out here, it'll either save your life or get you killed. He slid the eggs onto a plate and brought it over. Eat first, then we'll see. She ate. The eggs were good, better than good. She tried to remember the last time someone had cooked for her and came up empty. When she'd cleaned the plate, Rowan held out a hand. She took it, letting him pull her to her feet. The room tilted for a second, but she locked her knees and rode it out. All right? He asked. Fine. He didn't let go of her hand. Not yet. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, and she realized, with a jolt, that she couldn't remember the last time someone had touched her gently. Then he stepped back, and the moment passed. Come on, he said. Let's get you some air. Or the world outside this ranch house was bigger than Alara remembered. The land stretched out in every direction, flat and relentless, broken only by the occasional scrub brush or distant mesa. The sky overhead was so blue it hurt to look at. Rowan led her to the porch, where 2 chairs sat facing the horizon. She sank into one, grateful, and he took the other. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind that came from 2 people who didn't need to fill every gap with noise. Finally, Alara said, Why are you out here? Alone, I mean. Rowan leaned back, tipping his chair onto 2 legs. Got tired of answering to other people. Figured I'd carve out a piece of ground and make it mine. Lonely, though. Sometimes. He glanced at her. You were headed somewhere when the stage got hit. Where? She'd known the question was coming, but it still made her stomach twist. West, little town called Covenant Springs. I was supposed to meet a man there. Supposed to? He'd arranged for me to come out. We'd exchanged letters for 6 months. He needed a wife. I needed a way out of St. Louis. She shrugged, trying to make it sound casual. Business arrangement. You didn't love him. I didn't know him. Rowan let the chair legs hit the ground with a soft thump. You going to keep going? Once you're healed up? The truth was, she didn't know. The man in Covenant Springs, Samuel Porter, his name was, probably thought she was dead by now. And maybe that was easier. Maybe she could just... What? Stay here? With a stranger who'd pulled her out of the sand and patched her up, but clearly didn't know what to do with her now that she was conscious. I don't know, she admitted. I don't have money for another stage. Don't have money for anything. You could work, Rowan said. Ranch always needs help. I could pay you. She turned to stare at him. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a choice. You want to keep moving? I'll stake you the fare to Covenant Springs. You want to stay? You earn your keep. Either way, it's your call. Alara looked out at the horizon, at the endless stretch of nothing that had almost killed her. And then she looked at Rowan, at the hard lines of his face and the quiet steadiness in his eyes. I'll think about it, she said. He nodded. Fair enough. Chai. That night, after Rowan had gone to check on the livestock, Alara stood at the window and watched the stars come out. They were brighter here than they'd ever been in St. Louis, sharp and clear against the black. She thought about Samuel Porter, waiting in a town she'd never seen for a woman who might never arrive. She thought about the life she'd been running toward, safe, predictable, small. And then she thought about the way Rowan had looked at her when he'd offered her a choice. Not like she was something broken that needed fixing. Like she was someone capable of deciding her own fate. The desert had tried to kill her, failed. Maybe that meant something. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the smell of dust and sage, and something wilder. Alara pressed her palm against the cool glass and made a decision. She wasn't running anymore. The days turned into a week, and the week turned into something Alara couldn't quite name. She started small, helping with the chickens, hauling water from the well, mending the tears in Rowan's shirts that he'd been ignoring for months. He didn't ask her to, she just did it, because sitting still made her feel useless, and useless made her think too much. Rowan, for his part, treated her like a hired hand. He showed her how to muck out the stalls, how to check the fences for breaks, how to read the sky for weather. He didn't coddle her, didn't make allowances. If she couldn't keep up, that was her problem. She kept up. One afternoon, while they were working in the barn, she asked, "You ever think about getting help? Real help, I mean, not just someone passing through." He paused, hammer in hand. Thought about it. Never found anyone I trusted enough. You trust me? I'm starting to. It was the closest thing to a compliment she'd gotten from him, and it landed heavier than it should have. What changed? She asked. He drove a nail into the beam with 3 precise strikes, then looked at her. You didn't run. I couldn't. I was half dead. You could have run after, soon as you were strong enough, but you stayed. Started fixing things. That means something. Alara felt something warm unfurl in her chest, and she shoved it down. She didn't have room for warm. Warm got you hurt. I'm not staying forever, she said, just to be clear. Didn't ask you to. But the way he said it, quiet, almost regretful, made her wonder if maybe he wanted to. 2 weeks in, a rider appeared on the horizon. Rowan saw him first. They were outside, repairing a section of fence that had come loose in the last windstorm, when he straightened and shaded his eyes against the sun. Company, he said, and his voice had gone flat. Alara followed his gaze, a single horseman, moving slow and deliberate. Not running, not sneaking, just coming. You expecting anyone? She asked. No. They waited. Rowan's hand drifted toward the rifle leaning against the fence post, casual, but ready. Alara's pulse kicked up a notch. The rider stopped about 20 yards out and raised a hand. Rowan Cade? That's me. The man was young, maybe early 20s, with a deputy's badge pinned to his vest. He looked nervous. Name's Tom Briggs. I'm with the sheriff's office in Red Hollow. Mind if I come closer? Rowan nodded, and the deputy walked his horse forward, stopping a respectful distance away. What can I do for you, deputy? Rowan asked. Briggs shifted in his saddle, eyes flicking to Alara and then back to Rowan. We've been looking for a woman, survivor from a stage attack 3 weeks back. Heard you might have found someone fitting that description. Alara's stomach dropped. Rowan's expression didn't change. And if I did? Then she needs to know. There's a situation. Briggs pulled a piece of paper from his saddlebag and unfolded it. Man by the name of Samuel Porter filed a complaint. Says his fiancée was supposed to arrive in Covenant Springs and never showed. He's demanding the stage company compensate him for breach of contract. Alara blinked. Compensate him? I almost died. Yes, ma'am. And the company's arguing that since you're alive, there's no breach. But Porter's threatening to sue, and they want you to come testify. Briggs looked uncomfortable. There's also the matter of the gang. Sheriff wants to know if you can identify them. We've been trying to catch Garrett Finch for months, and if you saw him— She's not going anywhere, Rowan said, cutting him off. The deputy's eyebrows rose. Excuse me? You heard me. She's still recovering. She's not fit to travel. I'm standing right here, Alara said. I can speak for myself. Both men looked at her. She took a breath, thinking fast. Testifying meant going to Covenant Springs, meeting Samuel Porter, facing the gang in court if they ever caught them. Or she could stay, keep working, keep building something that felt, for the first time in her life, like it might be hers. Tell Samuel Porter, she said slowly, that I release him from any obligation. The contract's void. I'm not coming. Briggs stared. Ma'am, he's not going to like that. I don't care what he likes. She crossed her arms. As for the gang, I'll testify if you catch them. Until then, I'm staying here. The deputy looked at Rowan as if expecting him to override her. Rowan just shrugged. You heard the lady, he said. Briggs sighed, tucked the paper back into his saddlebag, and tipped his hat. All right then, I'll let the sheriff know. But ma'am, if that gang comes looking for you, this ranch is going to be the first place they check. Let them come, Alara said, surprising herself. The deputy rode off, and she and Rowan stood in the dust, watching him disappear. That was stupid, Rowan said after a long moment. Probably. You just painted a target on both our backs. I know. He turned to look at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something other than careful neutrality in his face. Concern, maybe, or fear. Why? He asked. Why stay? Alara met his eyes and told him the truth. Because I'm tired of running, and because— She hesitated. Because I think maybe there's something here worth fighting for. Rowan's jaw worked. He looked away, looked back. You're going to get us both killed. Maybe, she said, or maybe we'll survive. Either way, I'm done being a victim. He held her gaze for another beat, then nodded once, sharp and final. All right, then we better get ready. For what? For war, Rowan said. Because if Garrett Finch figures out you're alive, he's coming for you, and when he does, we're going to be ready to put him in the ground. The rifle felt heavier than it should have in Alara's hands. She'd held guns before. Her father had kept an old pistol in a drawer, more rust than metal. But this was different. This was deliberate. This was preparation for something that made her skin crawl. Stop thinking so much, Rowan said from behind her. You're tensing up. They were 50 yards from the ranch house, facing a line of bottles Rowan had set up on a fallen fence post. The sun hadn't been up an hour, and already the heat was building, turning the air thick and sticky. Alara adjusted her grip, tried to relax her shoulders. I can't help it. Yeah, you can. Breath in, let it out slow, squeeze the trigger like you're asking it nicely. She wanted to tell him that was the dumbest instruction she'd ever heard, but she did it anyway. Breathed in, out, squeezed. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, hard enough to bruise. The shot went wide, kicking up dust 3 feet to the left of the bottles. Better, Rowan said. I missed. But you didn't flinch. That's progress. Alara lowered the rifle, frustration coiling in her gut. It had been 4 days since the deputy's visit, 4 days of Rowan turning the ranch into something that looked less like a home and more like a fortress. He'd reinforced the doors, nailed shutters over the windows, moved supplies into the cellar. And every morning, before the work started, he dragged her out here and made her shoot until her arms ached. Again, he said. She raised the rifle, sighted down the barrel. This time, when she fired, one of the bottles exploded in a shower of glass. There you go. Rowan stepped up beside her, took the rifle, and reloaded it with practiced efficiency. You're learning. I don't want to learn this, Alara said quietly. He paused, looked at her. I know. Then why? Because wanting something and needing it aren't the same. You need this, and I need to know you can handle yourself if things go bad. When things go bad, she corrected. Yeah. He handed the rifle back. When? She took it, the weight of it settling into her hands like an accusation. You really think they're coming? I know they are. Question is when and how ready we'll be. He gestured toward the bottles. Now stop talking and keep shooting. She did. By the time the sun climbed high enough to make the metal too hot to touch, she'd hit 5 out of 10. Rowan said that was good enough for now. She didn't believe him. They walked back to the house in silence, and Alara tried not to think about what came next. Tried not to imagine men on horseback appearing on the horizon, guns drawn, faces set. Tried not to see Rowan bleeding out in the dirt while she stood there useless. She failed at all of it. Inside, Rowan filled 2 cups with water from the pump and handed her one. She drank, grateful, while he leaned against the counter and studied her with those winter sky eyes. "You're scared," he said. "Not a question." "Terrified," she admitted. "I keep thinking, what if I freeze? What if when it matters, I can't pull the trigger?" "Then you'll die." He said it flat, without cruelty, just fact. "But I don't think you will." "How can you be sure?" "Because you're still here. You could have run a dozen times by now, could have taken one of the horses, headed for town, disappeared. But you didn't. That tells me you've got more spine than you think." Alara wanted to believe him, wanted to feel the certainty he seemed to carry so easily, but all she felt was the weight of everything she didn't know how to do. "What if it's not enough?" she asked. Rowan pushed off the counter, crossed the space between them in 2 strides, and caught her chin gently, tilting her face up to meet his. "Then we go down fighting, together, and we make damn sure we take them with us." His hand was calloused, rough from years of work, but his touch was careful, like he was afraid she might break. She wasn't going to break. "Okay," she whispered. He held her gaze for another moment, then let go and stepped back. "Get some rest. We're riding into town this afternoon." "Why?" "Because I need to talk to the sheriff, and because you need to see what you're fighting for." She wanted to ask what that meant, but he was already heading for the door, and the moment had passed. Alara stood in the kitchen, alone, and pressed her palm against the spot where his hand had been. Her heart was doing something complicated in her chest, and she told it firmly to stop. There wasn't room for that. Not now. Maybe not ever. But her heart didn't listen. Red Hollow wasn't much to look at. A main street lined with sun-bleached buildings, a general store, a saloon, a church at the far end that looked like it had seen better days. Maybe 50 people lived here full-time, with another 100 scattered across the surrounding ranches. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and strangers stood out like blood on snow. Rowan tied the horses outside the sheriff's office, a squat building with bars on the windows and a sign that needed repainting. Alara followed him inside, her boots loud on the wooden floor. The sheriff was older than she'd expected, gray-haired and weathered, with eyes that had seen too much and forgotten none of it. He looked up from a stack of papers when they entered, and his expression shifted, surprise, then calculation. "Rowan Cade," he said. "Didn't expect to see you in town." "Sheriff Hayes?" Rowan nodded. "We need to talk." Hayes leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming on the desk. His gaze shifted to Alara. "This the woman from the stage attack?" "Alara Voss," she said, extending a hand. Hayes shook it, his grip firm. "Tom Briggs said you weren't interested in testifying." "That's not exactly what I said. I said I'd testify if you caught them." "Have you?" "Not yet, but we're close. Got word they hit a supply wagon 2 days south of here last week. Left 1 man dead, another critical. If they're following pattern, they'll swing back north soon." Rowan leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Which means they'll pass near my ranch. That's what I'm worried about." Hayes stood, moved to a map pinned to the wall. He tapped a spot marked with a red X. "This is you, and this," he traced a line with his finger, "is the route they've been working. They're smart, methodical. They scout ahead, hit fast, disappear before anyone can respond." "How many in the gang?" Alara asked. 6 confirmed, maybe 7. Garrett Finch leads them. He's the one you need to worry about, former cavalry officer, cashiered out for conduct unbecoming. Smart, ruthless, and he doesn't leave loose ends. "I'm a loose end," Alara said quietly. Hayes nodded. "Yeah, you are, which is why I'm asking you to reconsider staying out there. We've got a jail here, secure. You'd be safer." "No!" Alara's voice came out sharper than she intended. "I'm not hiding in a cell while Rowan faces them alone." "She's made her choice," Rowan said. "We're not here to debate it. We're here because I need to know what you're planning to do when Finch shows up." Hayes rubbed a hand over his face, looking suddenly tired. "What do you want me to say, Rowan? I've got one deputy, and he's barely old enough to shave. If Finch comes for you, we'll do what we can, but we're on our own," Rowan finished. "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." The silence that followed was heavy, weighted with things no one wanted to say. Finally, Hayes sighed. "I'll send Tom out to check on you every few days. If you see anything suspicious, fire 3 shots in the air. We'll come running." "How long will that take?" Alara asked. 2 hours? Maybe 3. "They'll be gone in 20 minutes, Rowan said flatly. "I know." Hayes met his eyes. "I'm sorry, I wish I could do more." Rowan pushed off the wall. "Appreciate the honesty at least. Come on, Alara." They were halfway to the door when Hayes called out. "Rowan? You're a good man. Don't do anything stupid." Rowan paused, glanced back. Define stupid. Dying for pride. "Not planning to die at all," Rowan said. Then, softer. "But if it comes to that, I'm taking them with me." They left before Hayes could respond. Outside, the sun was brutal, turning the dusty street into a furnace. Alara squinted against the glare, her mind turning over everything they'd just heard. 2 hours, she said. "That's a long time." "Yeah." Rowan untied the horses, handed her the reins to hers. "Long enough to get killed a dozen times over." "So what do we do?" He swung into the saddle, looked down at her. "We make sure we don't need rescuing." They rode in silence for a while, the town disappearing behind them. The landscape opened up. Endless scrubland punctuated by the occasional mesa, the sky so big it felt like you could fall into it. Alara had hated this place when she first arrived, had seen it as empty and hostile. But now, riding beside Rowan with the wind in her face, she was starting to understand it differently. It wasn't empty. It was waiting. "Tell me about him," she said suddenly. Rowan glanced over. "Who?" "Garrett Finch." "You said you knew of him. What does that mean?" Rowan was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "He came through here about 2 years ago, stayed a few weeks, played cards at the saloon, acted like a gentleman, charming even. Then, one night, a rancher accused him of cheating. Finch shot him in the street, claimed self-defense. No witnesses said otherwise, so he walked. And 3 months later, that rancher's widow lost her ranch, couldn't keep up with the payments. Finch's gang hit the bank courier carrying her loan money. Coincidence, maybe. But I don't believe in coincidences." Alara felt something cold settle in her stomach. "He planned it, even then. He's always planning. That's what makes him dangerous. He doesn't just react, he thinks 3 moves ahead." Rowan's jaw tightened. "If he knows you're alive, he's already figured out where you are and how to get to you. We just don't know when he'll make his move." "How do you fight someone like that?" "You don't fight him. You survive him. There's a difference." They crested a rise, and the ranch came into view below, small and stubborn against the vastness. Alara looked at it and felt something shift inside her. This place, these buildings, this man beside her, they mattered. They were worth defending. "Teach me," she said. Rowan looked at her, confused. "Teach you what?" "Everything. How to shoot better, how to think like him, how to survive." She turned to face him fully. "You said I've got spine. Prove it. Make me dangerous." Something flickered across Rowan's face, surprise maybe, or respect. "That's not something you learn in a few days." "Then we'd better get started." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. But if we're doing this, we're doing it right. No half measures, no quitting when it gets hard." "I don't quit," Alara said. "Good. Because what I'm about to put you through is going to make you wish you'd stayed on that stage and taken your chances with the desert." Despite everything, she smiled. "Try me." The training started that night. Rowan cleared the kitchen table, spread out a hand-drawn map of the ranch, and started talking tactics. "The house is the stronghold," he said, pointing to the rough square in the center. "Stone walls, limited entry points, clear sight lines. If they come at night, they'll use fire to flush us out, so we need water barrels placed here, here, and here." He marked spots with X's. "And we need an escape route." Alara leaned over the map, studying it. "The cellar." "Yeah, I've been digging it deeper, reinforcing the supports. If we have to, we can hold out down there for days. There's a tunnel that runs out to the barn, old smuggler's route from when this place belonged to someone else. I've been clearing it out." You've been planning this for a while, she said slowly. Since the day I found you. He looked up, met her eyes. I knew this was coming, just didn't know when. Something in his voice made her chest tight. You could have left me in the desert. Yeah, I could have. Why didn't you? Rowan's expression shifted, became something she couldn't quite read. Because I'm tired of being alone. And because... He stopped, shook his head. Doesn't matter. What matters is we're in this now. And we need to be ready. But it did matter. She could see it in the way he looked at her, in the careful distance he kept, like he was afraid of getting too close. He felt it too, that pull, that connection. And he was fighting it just as hard as she was. Okay, she said, forcing herself to focus on the map. What else? They worked late into the night, going over scenarios, planning contingencies. Rowan made her memorize sight lines, firing positions, escape routes. He quizzed her until she could recite them in her sleep. If they come from the north, he said, where do you position yourself? Second floor window, east side, clear view of the approach covered from return fire. If they breach the front door, fall back to the cellar entrance, create a bottleneck, make them come at me one at a time. If I go down? Her throat tightened. I don't let you go down. Elara. His voice was gentle but firm. If I go down, what do you do? She closed her eyes, forced herself to think past the panic. I get to the tunnel. I get out. I ride for town and I don't look back. Good girl. The praise shouldn't have warmed her the way it did, but her body wasn't listening to logic anymore. When they finally called it a night, Elara was exhausted. But instead of heading to bed, she found herself standing in the doorway, watching Rowan bank the fire. Can I ask you something? She said. He glanced up. Yeah. When you were in the war, she saw him tense, knew she was treading on dangerous ground, but pushed anyway. Did you ever get scared? Before a fight, I mean. Rowan straightened slowly, the firelight casting shadows across his face. Every single time. How did you deal with it? He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. I didn't. I just moved through it, felt the fear, let it sit there, and did what needed doing anyway. Fear doesn't make you weak, Elara. Acting like you don't feel it does. She nodded, filing that away. Were you cavalry? Like Finch? Infantry. Different kind of hell. He moved to the window, looked out at the darkness. I saw what cavalry officers could do when they stopped caring about the men under them. Finch isn't unique. He's just what happens when someone smart decides other people don't matter. Is that why you're out here? Away from people? Part of it. He turned back to her, and for the first time she saw something raw in his expression. I got tired of following orders that didn't make sense. Tired of watching good men die for bad reasons. Out here, the only person I answer to is me. And the only person I can get killed is me. Except now there's me, Elara said softly. Yeah, now there's you. The weight of that hung between them, heavy and complicated. I'm sorry, she said, for bringing this to your door. Don't be. I made the choice to bring you here. That's on me. He crossed back to her, stopped close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the lines etched by sun and worry. But I'm not sorry you stayed. Even with everything that's coming, I'm not sorry. Her breath caught. Rowan, get some sleep, he said, cutting her off before she could finish whatever thought was forming. Tomorrow's going to be harder. He was right. Tomorrow was harder, and the day after that was worse. Rowan pushed her relentlessly, shooting drills until her hands cramped, hand-to-hand combat that left her bruised and gasping, endurance runs in the heat that made her want to quit. But she didn't quit. She showed up every morning, took everything he threw at her, and came back for more. A week passed, then 2. The deputy came by twice, reported nothing unusual, and left looking worried. The waiting was its own kind of torture. Every sound made Elara jump. Every shadow on the horizon looked like riders. But the ranch was changing too. Rowan had turned it into something formidable. Water barrels positioned strategically, ammunition stored in multiple locations, sight lines cleared. And Elara was changing with it. She could hit a target at 100 yards now, could reload a rifle without looking, could move through the house in complete darkness without stumbling. She was becoming dangerous. One evening, as the sun was setting and painting the sky in shades of blood and copper, Rowan found her on the porch. She was cleaning the rifle, her movements automatic now. You're getting good at that, he said, settling into the chair beside her. I have a good teacher. You're a good student, better than I expected. She glanced at him. You thought I'd quit. Thought you'd try. Most people do when things get hard. I'm not most people. No, he agreed. You're not. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the light fade. Alara finished with the rifle, set it aside, and let herself relax for the first time all day. Can I tell you something? She asked. Sure. I used to think I was running toward something. A new life, a fresh start. But really I was just running away. From my past, from myself, from everything that hurt. She pulled her knees up to her chest. And then I ended up here. And I realized there's nowhere left to run. So I had to stop. And it's terrifying, but also liberating, like I finally get to decide who I am instead of just reacting to what happens to me. Rowan leaned back, his expression thoughtful. Who are you then? She considered that. A month ago, she would have said she was nobody. A woman with no prospects, no future, no real value. But now, I'm someone who doesn't give up, she said. Someone who fights, someone who… She stopped, looked at him. Someone who's tired of being afraid. Good, Rowan said quietly, because what's coming is going to test all of that. I know. He reached over, squeezed her hand once, then let go. It was a small gesture, brief, but it felt like a promise. They would face this together. Whatever came next, they wouldn't face it alone. That night, Alara dreamed of fire and gunshots and men with cold eyes. She woke gasping, reaching for the rifle that now lived beside her bed. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she scanned the darkness, but the house was quiet, empty. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to let the adrenaline fade. Just a dream, just a sound. Outside. Soft but distinct. Alara was moving before she could think, grabbing the rifle and padding barefoot to the window. She peered through the shutters, searching the darkness. Nothing. Just shadows and moonlight. Then she saw it. A figure, standing at the edge of the property line, watching the house. Her blood turned to ice. She ran to Rowan's room, shook his shoulder. He came awake instantly, hand going for the gun under his pillow. Someone's outside, she whispered. He was up and moving in seconds, pulling on his boots, checking his weapon. Together they crept to the window. The figure was still there, motionless, waiting. How many? Rowan asked, his voice barely audible. Just one, I think. He studied the silhouette for a long moment, then swore softly. Stay here. Like hell. But he was already moving, slipping out the door with practiced silence. Alara watched from the window, her heart in her throat, as he circled wide, using the shadows for cover. The figure didn't move, didn't react. Rowan got within 20 feet, called out, You're trespassing. The figure turned slowly, and Alara's breath caught. It was a man, young, maybe 18, with wide eyes and hands raised. Don't shoot, the kid said, voice shaking. I'm not armed, I swear. Then what are you doing on my property in the middle of the night? I have a message from Garrett Finch. The name hit like a punch. Alara was moving before she could stop herself, out the door and across the yard. Rowan shot her a warning look, but she ignored it. What message? She demanded. The kid flinched, clearly terrified. He knows you're here, both of you, and he's coming. 3 days. He wanted you to know. Wanted you to have time to prepare, he said. Or run. Why would he warn us? Rowan asked. I don't know. He said it was the sporting thing to do. Said he respects courage. The kid swallowed hard. I'm supposed to report back whether you're still here. Alara and Rowan exchanged a look. Tell him, Alara said, her voice hard, that we'll be here, and we'll be waiting. The kid nodded frantically, turned, and ran into the darkness. They heard the sound of a horse, then hoofbeats fading into the night. Rowan lowered his gun slowly. He's playing with us. I know. 3 days, that's not much time. It's enough. Alara turned to face him, and in the moonlight she saw her own fear reflected in his eyes. But she also saw determination. We finish the preparations, we set the traps, and when he comes, we make sure he regrets it. Rowan's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. You really have changed. You made me dangerous, she said, like I asked. Yeah, I did. He reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His hand lingered, warm against her cheek. Don't make me regret it. I won't. They stood there for a moment, the space between them charged with everything they weren't saying. Then Rowan stepped back, and the moment broke. Come on, he said. We've got work to do. They spent the next 3 days turning the ranch into a killing field. Tripwires in the approaches, hidden pits covered with brush, firing positions reinforced and stocked. The house became a fortress, every window a potential sniper's nest, every door a choke point. Alara worked until her hands bled, until exhaustion made her clumsy. But she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. On the third day, as the sun climbed toward its apex, she found herself standing in the yard with Rowan, both of them armed and ready. If this goes bad, Rowan started, it won't. But if it does, she turned to him, caught his face in her hands and kissed him, hard and desperate and full of everything she'd been holding back. He froze for half a second, then pulled her closer, kissing her back like the world was ending. Maybe it was. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alara said, That's what you get to come back to. So don't you dare die on me. Rowan's eyes were dark, intense. Same goes for you. Deal. They turned together to face the horizon, weapons ready, hearts pounding. And they waited for hell to arrive. Hell arrived at sunset. Alara saw them first, 6 riders materializing out of the heat shimmer like specters, moving in a loose formation that spoke of military discipline. They were still a mile out, maybe less, taking their time. No rush. They knew their prey wasn't going anywhere. Rowan, she called, her voice steady despite the ice flooding her veins. He was beside her in seconds, rifle already in hand. He followed her gaze and she watched his jaw tighten. 6, he said quietly, just like Hayes said. The one in front. That's him, isn't it? She didn't need him to confirm it. Even at this distance, Garrett Finch was unmistakable, sitting tall in the saddle, unhurried, like he was out for an evening ride. Behind him, his men fanned out in a pattern that suggested this wasn't their first siege. Get inside, Rowan said. Take your position upstairs. Don't fire until I do. What are you going to do? Talk to him. Buy us time. Rowan, inside. Now. His voice had gone hard, the way it did when he was scared and trying not to show it. Trust me. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that talking to a man like Finch was suicide, but they'd planned for this, rehearsed it, and standing here debating would only waste the advantage they had. Alara turned and ran for the house, her boots kicking up dust. Behind her, she heard Rowan's steady footsteps as he walked, not ran, walked, to the center of the yard. Deliberate, unafraid. She made it to the second floor, positioned herself at the east window like they'd practiced. From here, she had a clear line of sight to the approach. The rifle felt like an old friend now, familiar and deadly. She checked the load, settled the stock against her shoulder, and waited. The riders kept coming. Down in the yard, Rowan stood alone, a single figure against 6. Alara's throat tightened, but she forced herself to breathe, to focus. The riders stopped about 50 yards out, just beyond effective rifle range. Smart. They spread out wider, creating multiple targets, making it impossible to cover them all at once. Garrett Finch dismounted with the easy grace of someone who'd spent half his life in a saddle. He was younger than Alara had expected, maybe 40, with dark hair graying at the temples and a scar that cut a pale line through his left eyebrow. He wore a cavalry officer's coat, dusty but well-maintained, and when he smiled, it didn't reach his eyes. "Rowan Cade," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the distance. Educated, Eastern accent, just like Alara remembered. "I appreciate you coming out to meet me like a gentleman. Saves us all a great deal of unpleasantness." "Finch," Rowan's voice was flat. "You're not welcome here." "No, I don't imagine I am, but hospitality isn't really what I'm after." Finch took a few steps forward, hands loose at his sides. Non-threatening, which somehow made him more dangerous. "I'm looking for someone. A woman. Brown hair, mid-20s, probably still recovering from a rather harrowing ordeal in the desert." "Don't know anyone like that. Don't you?" Finch's smile widened. That's disappointing. I was hoping we could handle this civilly. You see, this woman, Miss Elara Voss, I believe her name is, witnessed something unfortunate. And I'm a man who values discretion. So you kill witnesses. I eliminate complications. There's a difference. Finch clasped his hands behind his back, the picture of reason. Now, I could storm your little fortress here. Would cost me a man or two, certainly. You've prepared well. I can see the tripwires from here, and I'm sure you've got firing positions established. But eventually we'd overwhelm you. Simple mathematics. Upstairs, Alara's finger tightened on the trigger. She could take him. One shot. End this before it started. But Rowan had said, wait, and she'd promised to trust him. Or, Finch continued, you could be reasonable. Send the woman out. We have a brief conversation, clear up some misunderstandings, and everyone walks away. Well, most everyone. You'd walk away, certainly. I've no quarrel with you, Mr. Cade. That's a hell of an offer, Rowan said. Except we both know you're lying. Finch's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. Lying about which part? All of it. You don't let witnesses walk, and you don't leave loose ends. You kill her, then you kill me, then you burn this place to the ground and ride off like nothing happened. Perceptive, Finch nodded approvingly. I can see why she chose to stay with you, but you're forgetting something important, Mr. Cade. This isn't a negotiation. It's a courtesy. I'm giving you a chance to die quick and clean instead of slow and screaming. Most men would be grateful. I'm not most men. No, you're not. Finch's smile faded. You're a stubborn fool about to get yourself killed for a woman you barely know. Is she really worth it? Rowan didn't hesitate. Yeah, she is. The words hit Alara like a fist to the chest. She blinked hard, forced herself to stay focused. Finch sighed, the sound theatrical and disappointed. Well, I tried. He raised his hand and his men reached for their weapons. One more thing, Rowan said quickly. Finch paused. Yes? The sheriff knows you're here. I sent word this morning. If we die, he'll hunt you to the ends of the earth. It was a bluff. They hadn't sent word. There hadn't been time. But Finch didn't know that. The outlaw leader studied Rowan for a long moment, then laughed. Nice try. But Hayes doesn't have the men or the spine to come after me. And even if he did, I'd be 3 states away before he finished saddling his horse. He dropped his hand. Kill them. But keep the woman breathing if you can. I want to look her in the eye before she dies. Everything happened at once. Rowan dove for cover as the first shots rang out. Alara fired, her bullet catching one of Finch's men in the shoulder. He spun out of the saddle with a cry, and chaos erupted. The riders scattered, some dismounting, others charging forward. Alara tracked one, fired, missed, reloaded, fired again. This time the bullet found home, and the rider slumped forward. 2 down, 4 left, plus Finch. Gunfire hammered the house, bullets punching through shutters and splintering wood. Alara ducked, rolled to a new position, came up shooting. Below, Rowan had made it to cover behind a water trough. He was firing methodically, each shot deliberate. One of the riders made it to the porch. Alara swung her rifle toward him, but he was too close, the angle wrong. She watched in horror as he kicked in the door. "Rowan!" she screamed. But Rowan was pinned down, return fire keeping him behind the trough. He couldn't get to the house. Alara abandoned the rifle, grabbed the pistol from her belt, and ran for the stairs. Her heart hammered so hard she could barely hear over it. The rider would be inside now, searching. She had seconds. She hit the ground floor just as the man rounded the corner from the kitchen. They saw each other at the same time. He was faster, brought his gun up first. Alara threw herself sideways, felt the bullet tear past her ear. She hit the floor hard, rolled, came up with the pistol extended, fired 3 times. The first shot went wide. The second caught him in the chest. The third took him in the throat. He went down choking, blood spreading across the floorboards. Alara scrambled to her feet, shaking so badly she could barely stand. No time. Move. She grabbed his rifle, newer than hers, better maintained, and ran back upstairs. Outside, the gunfire had intensified. She took up position at the window again, forced herself to breathe. 3 left, plus Finch. Rowan had moved, was now behind the barn. Smart. Better cover, clearer sightlines. He'd taken down another rider while she'd been fighting inside. The body lay sprawled in the dust, unmoving. 2 left, plus Finch. The remaining riders had taken cover behind a cluster of rocks about 70 yards out. They were firing sporadically, keeping Rowan pinned, but they weren't advancing, waiting for orders, maybe, or waiting for nightfall. Alara scanned for Finch, couldn't find him. That was bad. He'd dismounted somewhere, slipped away while everyone was focused on the fight. Where? A crash from downstairs. Wood splintering, the back door. Alara spun, ran for the stairs again. She was halfway down when Finch appeared at the bottom, gun drawn, that same cold smile on his face. "Hello, Miss Voss," he said pleasantly. "We meet at last." She brought the rifle up, but he was faster. His shot caught the weapon square in the stock, tearing it from her hands. The impact sent her stumbling backward, and she lost her footing on the stairs. She fell hard, pain exploding up her spine. The pistol, still tucked in her belt, dug into her ribs. She reached for it. Finch was already there, boot coming down on her wrist. "I wouldn't." She froze. He crouched down, keeping the gun trained on her head. Up close, his eyes were the color of slate. Empty. "You've caused me considerable trouble, you know. I had to abandon a very lucrative route because of you. Had to change my entire operation. Do you have any idea how inconvenient that is?" "You killed an innocent man," Alara said through gritted teeth. "I killed a man who was in my way. There's a difference." He tilted his head, studying her like she was an interesting specimen. "You should have died in the desert. Would have saved us all this messiness." "Sorry to disappoint." "Oh, you haven't disappointed. Quite the contrary. You've been entertaining. The way you fought just now. Impressive. Rowan's taught you well." He glanced toward the door. "Where is our gallant defender, I wonder?" As if in answer, gunfire erupted outside. One of Finch's remaining men screamed. Finch's expression tightened. "Running out of help, it seems. No matter. I'll finish this myself." He stood, still keeping the gun on her. "Get up." Alara rose slowly, mind racing. The pistol was still in her belt, hidden by her shirt. If she could just... "Hands where I can see them," Finch ordered. She raised her hands. "Good girl. Now, we're going to walk outside. You're going to tell Rowan to throw down his weapons, and then, well, then things get unpleasant." He gestured toward the door. Alara moved, her mind working frantically. She needed an opening, one chance. They stepped out onto the porch. The yard was a war zone. Bodies in the dust, blood soaking into the sand. Behind the barn, Rowan was still standing, rifle raised. When he saw Alara, his face went white. "No," he said, the word barely audible across the distance. Finch pressed the gun against Alara's spine. "Drop your weapon, Mr. Cade, or I put a bullet through her heart." "Don't do it," Alara shouted. "He's going to kill us both anyway." "Shut up." Finch's voice was calm, but she felt the gun dig harder into her back. "Mr. Cade, I'm growing impatient." Rowan's jaw worked. His knuckles were white on the rifle stock. For a terrible moment, Alara thought he was actually going to do it. Then his eyes met hers, and she saw the calculation there, the same cold math she'd learned over the past weeks. He couldn't save her, not like this, but maybe she could save herself. "I'm sorry," Rowan said quietly, and he raised the rifle. Alara understood instantly. She threw herself sideways toward Finch instead of away. The movement surprised him. People always ran from the gun, not toward it, and his shot went wide. Rowan's didn't. The bullet caught Finch in the shoulder, spinning him around. His gun clattered across the porch. Alara scrambled for it, but Finch was faster despite the wound. He kicked it away, then backhanded her across the face. Stars exploded across her vision. She tasted blood. Finch grabbed her by the hair, hauled her up. He was moving toward his gun, dragging her with him, and she could hear Rowan running, boots pounding across the yard. He wouldn't make it in time. Alara reached for the pistol in her belt. Her fingers closed around the grip. She pulled it free, jammed it against Finch's ribs, and fired. The gun bucked in her hand. Once, twice, 3 times. Finch's grip loosened. He staggered backward, looking down at the spreading red across his shirt with something like surprise. "You," he started. Alara shot him again. He went down like a felled tree, hard and final. Blood pooled beneath him, soaking into the wooden planks. She stood there, gun still raised, breathing in ragged gasps. Her hands were shaking. Her ears rang from the gunshots. And she couldn't look away from Finch's body, from the man she'd just killed. Rowan's hands closed over her shoulders. Elara, look at me. She couldn't move. Elara, firmer this time. He gently turned her away from the body, forced her to meet his eyes. It's over. You're okay. I killed him, she whispered. Yeah, you did. Her voice broke. I didn't even think. You survived. That's what matters. He pulled her against his chest, and she let herself collapse into him. His heartbeat was fast but steady under her ear, real, alive. They stood like that for a long moment, the world slowly coming back into focus around them. The last of Finch's men had fled. She could hear hoofbeats fading into the distance. The ranch was destroyed. The house was riddled with bullet holes. There were bodies in the yard, but they were alive. Is it really over? She asked against his shirt. Rowan's arms tightened around her. Yeah, it's really over. She pulled back enough to look at him. He had blood on his face. His or someone else's, she couldn't tell. A cut above his eyebrow, bruises forming along his jaw. But his eyes were clear, focused on her. You called his bluff, she said, when you raised the rifle. You knew I'd move. I hoped you would. Wasn't sure. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing away blood from where Finch had hit her. Scared the hell out of me. Joined the club. Something that might have been a laugh escaped him, rough and shaky. Come on, let's get inside before someone else shows up. They made it as far as the porch before Alara's legs gave out. Rowan caught her, lowered her to sit on the steps. He sat beside her, both of them too exhausted to move further. The sun had finished setting, leaving the sky streaked with purple and gold, beautiful and utterly indifferent to the violence that had just unfolded beneath it. We need to bury them, Alara said after a while. Tomorrow. Tonight, He stopped, shook his head. I don't know what we do tonight. We sit here. We breathe. We figure out the rest later. Sounds like a plan. They sat in silence as the stars came out, one by one. Alara's mind kept replaying the moment she'd pulled the trigger, the look on Finch's face, the weight of what she'd done. She'd killed a man, 4 men, actually, if she counted the others. Her hands were shaking again. Hey, Rowan's voice was gentle. What you did in there, with Finch, that wasn't murder. That was survival. Doesn't feel like it. I know, but it's the truth. He paused, choosing his words carefully. The first time I killed someone, I was 19. Confederate soldier, couldn't have been much older than me. I threw up for an hour afterward. Couldn't sleep for days. She looked at him. How did you get past it? I didn't. Not really. You don't get past something like that. You just learn to carry it. The weight gets easier with time, but it never goes away completely. His hand found hers, squeezed. But here's what I learned. Feeling it means you're still human. The day it stops bothering you is the day you need to worry. Alara nodded slowly, filing that away. Thank you. For everything. For training me, for not giving up when I wanted to quit, for standing with me. Didn't have a choice. Couldn't let you face this alone. Why not? He turned to look at her fully, and in the starlight, she saw something raw and honest in his expression. Because somewhere between pulling you out of that desert and watching you learn to shoot, I started giving a damn. About you. About what happened to you. He swallowed hard. About us. Her heart did something complicated. Rowan, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know, before we deal with whatever comes next. But she was already moving, closing the distance between them. She kissed him like she had before the fight, but different this time, less desperate, more certain. This wasn't goodbye or good luck. This was a promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she said, I'm staying, just so you know. This isn't temporary anymore. You sure? Because there's going to be questions. The sheriff, the law, all of it could get messy. I don't care. Messy I can handle. She rested her forehead against his. What I can't handle is walking away from this. From you. His arms came around her, solid and sure. Then don't. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in the ruins of the battle they'd survived. Eventually, they'd have to move. Clean up, bury the dead, face the consequences. But for now, they just sat on the porch steps and breathed, and let the night settle around them like a blanket. The deputy arrived 3 hours later, drawn by the gunfire that half the county had probably heard. Tom Briggs took one look at the bodies in the yard and went pale. "What in the—" "Garrett Finch," Rowan said flatly. He'd been dragging bodies into a line, grim work that Alara had tried to help with until he'd told her to sit down before she collapsed. "He came for Alara. We defended ourselves." Briggs dismounted slowly, hand hovering near his gun like he wasn't sure what he was walking into. "Finch is dead?" "Very." "And the others?" "2 ran. 4 stayed. You can count. The deputy moved through the carnage, checking bodies, his expression growing more shocked by the minute. When he got to Finch, he crouched down, studied the bullet wounds. "Close range," he said. "Who shot him?" "I did," Alara said from the porch. Briggs looked at her, really looked, taking in the blood on her clothes, the bruises forming on her face, the exhausted set of her shoulders. "You killed Garrett Finch. He was going to kill us. I didn't have a choice. I'm not." Briggs stood, rubbed a hand over his face. "I'm not questioning that. Just trying to process. Finch has been a nightmare for 2 years. The sheriff's been trying to catch him since he got here. And you just—" "She defended her home," Rowan said, moving to stand beside Alara, "against 6 armed men. She's a hero, not a criminal." "I didn't say—" Briggs stopped, took a breath. "Look, I need to get Sheriff Hayes out here. We'll need statements from both of you. But off the record, you did this county a favor. Finch and his gang have killed at least 12 people that we know of. Probably more." "So we're not in trouble?" Alara asked. "For killing the territory's most wanted outlaw after he attacked your home?" "No, ma'am. You're not in trouble." He glanced at the house, at the bullet holes and shattered windows. "But you're going to have one hell of a story to tell." Sheriff Hayes arrived at dawn with 2 more deputies and a wagon for the bodies. He spent an hour walking the property, examining evidence, taking statements. When he was done, he found Rowan and Alara sitting on the porch, both too tired to move. "Well," Hayes said, settling onto the step beside them, "this is going to make quite a report." "Is there going to be an investigation?" Rowan asked. "Officially, yes, but between you and me, the evidence speaks for itself. Finch came here looking for trouble, and he found it." Hayes pulled out a pipe, packed it thoughtfully. "The territorial governor's been offering a reward for Finch. $500, dead or alive." Alara blinked. "Don't turn it down," Hayes interrupted. "You earned it. Use it to fix this place up. Or start over somewhere else. Your choice." She looked at Rowan. He shrugged. "Your call." $500. More money than she'd ever had in her life. Enough to leave, if she wanted. To go anywhere, start fresh, leave this violence behind. But when she looked around, at the ranch, at Rowan, at the life they'd fought so hard to protect, she realized she didn't want to leave. This was home now, broken and bloody, but hers. "We'll use it to rebuild," she said. "Fix the house, replace what was destroyed." Hayes nodded approvingly. "Smart. And for what it's worth, you 2 did good. Finch was a monster. World's better off without him." "Doesn't make it easier," Alara said quietly. "No, it doesn't, but it makes it right." He stood, knocked ash from his pipe. "We'll handle the cleanup. You 2 get some rest. And Miss Voss, welcome to Red Hollow. Officially." After Hayes and his deputies left with the bodies, Rowan and Alara finally went inside. The house was a disaster. Furniture overturned, windows shattered, blood on the floors. It would take weeks to repair, months maybe. But it was still standing, still theirs. Alara sank onto the one chair that hadn't been destroyed, and Rowan brought her water. She drank gratefully, then set the cup aside and looked at him. "What now?" she asked. "Now we clean up. We rebuild. We figure out how to live with what we did." "Just like that?" "Just like that." He crouched in front of her, took her hands in his. "Look, I'm not going to lie and say this is going to be easy. There's going to be nightmares, guilt, days when you can't stop seeing Finch's face, but we'll deal with it, together." "You're sure you want that? Want me, after all this?" "After all this?" "Alara, you stood beside me when most people would have run. You learned to fight, learned to shoot, learned to survive. And when it mattered, you didn't hesitate." His grip tightened. "So yeah, I'm sure. Question is, are you?" She thought about it, about everything that had brought her here, the ambush, the desert, the collapse, about Rowan finding her, taking her in, teaching her to be strong, about the kiss before the battle and the promise after, about the fact that somewhere along the way this hard, quiet man had become the most important person in her world. "Yeah," she said, "I'm sure." He smiled then, really smiled, and it transformed his face, made him look younger, less burdened. "Good, because I wasn't planning to let you go anyway." She laughed, the sound surprising her. After everything, she could still laugh. That had to mean something. Rowan stood, pulled her to her feet. "Come on, let's get you cleaned up and into bed. We've got a long day ahead of us tomorrow." "What about you?" "I'll clean up after. Someone's got to keep watch, make sure those other two don't come back." "Rowan, I'll be fine. Get some rest." She wanted to argue, but exhaustion was catching up with her, pulling her under. She managed to wash her face and hands, change into clean clothes before collapsing onto the bed. Sleep claimed her instantly, deep and dreamless. When she woke, it was afternoon. Sunlight streamed through the broken shutters, painting stripes across the floor. For a moment she was disoriented, couldn't remember where she was or why everything hurt. Then it came rushing back. The fight, Finch, the gunshots and blood and bodies. She sat up slowly, her body protesting. Every muscle ached. Her face throbbed where Finch had hit her. But she was alive. Rowan was asleep in the chair beside the bed, rifle across his lap, head tilted back against the wall. He looked exhausted even in sleep, lines of tension etched around his eyes and mouth. Alara stood carefully, took the rifle from his lap, and set it aside. Then she grabbed a blanket and draped it over him. He stirred but didn't wake. She left him sleeping and went to survey the damage in daylight. It was worse than she'd thought. Windows shattered, furniture destroyed, the front door hanging crooked on its hinges. The yard was torn up from the fighting, dark stains in the dust marking where men had died. But the barn was intact. The livestock had survived. And the house, despite everything, was still standing. They could fix this. It would take time and money and work, but they could fix it. Alara rolled up her sleeves and got started. She spent the rest of the day cleaning, sweeping up glass, righting furniture, scrubbing blood from the floorboards. It was hard, physical work that left her hands raw and her back screaming, but it felt good, productive, like she was taking control back. Rowan found her at sunset, on her knees scrubbing the kitchen floor. He crouched beside her, gently took the brush from her hands. "You should be resting," he said. "So should you. Touché." He studied the floor, the progress she'd made. "You've been busy. Had to do something. Couldn't just sit." He nodded, understanding without her having to explain. "Come on, let's take a break. I'll make us something to eat." They sat on the porch in the fading light, sharing a meal of beans and hardtack. Not fancy, but it filled the hollowness. Around them, the desert stretched endless and uncaring, beautiful in its own harsh way. "What are you thinking about?" Rowan asked. Alara considered the question. "About how different everything is now. A month ago, I was on that stage, heading toward a life I didn't want with a man I didn't know. And now," she gestured at the ranch, at him, at everything. "Now I'm here, and I can't imagine being anywhere else. Even after everything that happened. Especially after everything that happened. Because it means I chose this. I fought for it. It's mine in a way nothing else has ever been." Rowan was quiet for a moment. "You know people are going to talk. Woman living alone with a man, no marriage, no chaperone. Let them talk. Could make things difficult. For you especially." She turned to look at him. "Are you trying to propose or trying to warn me off?" He had the grace to look embarrassed. "Neither. Both. I don't know. I want you to know what you're getting into. I know exactly what I'm getting into. And I don't care what people say." She reached over, took his hand. "But if you're asking, yes. Whenever you're ready. I'll say yes." His eyes widened. Weren't you?" He stared at her, then laughed. A real laugh, full and genuine. "You're trouble, you know that?" "You like trouble." "Yeah," he admitted. "I really do." They sat there as the stars emerged, hands linked, watching the night settle over the land they'd defended together. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of sage and dust and possibility. Tomorrow, they'd keep rebuilding. They'd repair the house, mend the fences, put the ranch back together piece by piece. They'd deal with questions from neighbors, maybe judgment from the town. They'd carry the weight of what they'd done, the lives they'd taken. But tonight, they just sat together and breathed and let themselves feel what they'd been too busy surviving to acknowledge. Relief, pride, hope, and something else. Something that felt dangerous and precious and worth protecting. "I love you," Alara said quietly. In case that wasn't clear, Rowan's hand tightened around hers. "It was clear, but I'm glad you said it anyway." He turned to look at her, his eyes catching the starlight. "I love you too, have for a while now. Just didn't know how to say it." "You don't have to say it. You show it every day." "Yeah, well, words matter too sometimes." She leaned against him and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. They stayed like that for a long time, two people who'd survived hell together and come out the other side changed but unbroken. The desert had tried to kill Alara. Garrett Finch had tried to kill her. The world had thrown everything it had at her, and she was still standing. More than that, she was thriving. And she wasn't alone anymore. That, more than anything, felt like victory. The first week after the siege passed in a blur of physical labor that left Alara too exhausted to dream. That was fine by her. She'd take exhaustion over nightmares any day. She and Rowan fell into a rhythm. Up before dawn, work until their hands bled, collapse at sunset. They replaced the shattered windows with oiled canvas until proper glass could be ordered from the territorial capital. They patched bullet holes with wood salvaged from the barn. They scrubbed and cleaned until the house no longer smelled like gunpowder and death. On the 8th day, a wagon rolled up the drive. Alara tensed automatically, hand moving toward the rifle that now lived within arm's reach at all times. But Rowan touched her shoulder. "It's all right," he said. "That's Martha Henshaw, owns the general store in town." Alara watched as a stout woman in her 50s climbed down from the wagon seat with surprising agility. Behind her came two younger women, daughters, maybe, based on the similar set of their jaws. Martha took one look at the ranch, at the patched walls and canvas windows, and shook her head. "Lord have mercy, Tom Briggs said it was bad, but I didn't realize—" "We're managing," Rowan said, moving forward to shake her hand. "Wasn't expecting company." "Well, you got it anyway. Brought some things figured you could use." Martha gestured to the wagon bed, which was piled with lumber, nails, and what looked like rolls of actual glass. "Town took up a collection. Everyone chipped in." Alara blinked. Why would they do that? Martha turned to study her, and Alara felt the weight of that assessment. "Because you killed Garrett Finch. Because you stood your ground when most folks would have run. And because—" She paused, softened slightly. "Because this territory takes care of its own. And like it or not, you're one of us now." Something warm and unexpected bloomed in Alara's chest. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just help us unload this wagon before my back gives out completely." Martha turned to her daughters. "Girls, stop gawking and get moving." They worked for the next 3 hours, hauling supplies, sorting materials, making plans. Martha had brought more than just building materials. There were jars of preserves, smoked meat, flour, coffee, sugar. Luxuries that Alara and Rowan had been doing without since the attack. "Town's also hired a glazier to come out next week," Martha said, wiping her hands on her apron. "He'll get those windows properly fitted. No charge. It's covered by the collection." "That's too much," Rowan protested. "Nonsense. You think we're going to let the people who put Finch in the ground live like squatters? Bad for morale." She fixed him with a stern look. "Now, I heard tell you two aren't married." Alara felt her face heat. We're none of my business, I know. But people talk, and some of that talk's not kind, especially toward Miss Voss here." Martha's expression was neutral, but Alara could read the warning beneath it. "Just thought you should know what you're up against." "We appreciate the concern," Rowan said carefully. "But our arrangement is our own affair." "Fair enough, but a wedding would quiet the gossips, and the Reverend in Red Hollow owes me a favor." She let that hang in the air, then moved on before either of them could respond. "Now, about that front door. The frame's cracked. You're going to need to replace the whole thing, or it'll never hang straight." They walked Martha through what they'd already repaired and what still needed doing. By the time the sun started its descent, they had a plan. And more help than Alara had known to hope for. Martha and her daughters left as the light was failing, the wagon considerably lighter. As the dust from their departure settled, Alara turned to Rowan. "A wedding would quiet the gossips," she said, mimicking Martha's tone. He snorted. Subtle as a hammer, that woman. She's not wrong, though, is she? Rowan was quiet for a moment, looking out at the horizon. No, she's not wrong, but I'm not going to marry you just to shut people up. Then why would you marry me? He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. Because I want to. Because I can't imagine my life without you in it. Because when I think about the future, you're in every part of it. He paused. But only if that's what you want, not because some busybody thinks we should. Elara moved closer until they were nearly touching. What if I want it too? What if I want the whole thing? Marriage, partnership, building something real together. Then I'd say we should talk to the Reverend. His hand came up to cup her face. But only when we're ready, not because we're being pressured. I'm ready now. You sure? Because there's no taking it back once. She kissed him, cutting off whatever reasonable objection he was about to raise. When she pulled back, she said, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The corner of his mouth lifted. All right then, we'll talk to the Reverend next time we're in town. Just like that? Just like that. He pulled her close, rested his chin on top of her head. Fair warning, though. I'm not good at fancy words or romantic gestures. You're going to get a simple ceremony and a husband who tracks mud in the house. I don't want fancy. I want real. And you're about as real as they come. They stood there in the fading light, holding each other, and Elara felt something settle deep in her bones. This was right. Despite everything, the violence, the fear, the uncertainty, this was exactly where she was supposed to be. The following week brought the glazier, a taciturn man named Otto, who installed windows with the precision of a surgeon. Behind him came a carpenter to fix the door frame, then a roofer to patch the spots where bullets had punched through shingles. The ranch transformed slowly from a battlefield back into a home. Not the same home it had been, the bullet scars would always be visible if you knew where to look, but something stronger, something that had survived. Elara threw herself into the work with the same intensity she'd brought to learning to shoot. She learned to hammer nails straight, to measure twice and cut once, to read the grain of wood before working it. Her hands developed new calluses, her muscles adapted to different kinds of strain, and at night, after the work was done, she and Rowan would sit on the porch and plan. Not just for the ranch, but for the future. We should expand this herd, Rowan said one evening, sketching rough diagrams in the dust with a stick. Another 30 head, maybe 40. We've got the grazing land for it. That's expensive. We've got the reward money. Might as well put it to use. Elara considered it. What about water? We'd need another well. There's a spot near the eastern boundary that's always stayed green. Might be water close to the surface there. He looked at her. But that's long-term thinking. You sure you want to invest in this place? Where else would I invest? You could use that money to go anywhere. Start fresh somewhere without bullet holes in the walls. She took the stick from him, scratched her own addition to his diagram. I don't want anywhere else. This is home. These holes are part of our story now. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right, then we build it bigger, better, make it something that lasts. They rode into Red Hollow the following Saturday, ostensibly for supplies, but really to see the Reverend. The town had changed subtly since the last time Elara had been here, or maybe she was just seeing it differently. People nodded to her on the street, tipped their hats. A few stopped to shake Rowan's hand and welcome them both. Not everyone was friendly. There were stares, whispers. One woman pulled her children close when Elara passed, like violence might be contagious. But mostly people seemed curious, respectful even. The church sat at the end of Main Street, white paint peeling in the sun. Reverend Walsh was a lean man in his 60s with kind eyes and hands that shook slightly when he gestured. Mr. Cade, he said warmly, and Miss Voss. Martha said you might be coming by. That woman cannot keep a secret, Rowan muttered. Walsh smiled. She means well. Please sit. What can I do for you? They sat in the small office behind the sanctuary, and Elara let Rowan do the talking. We'd like to get married, he said simply. Nothing fancy, just legal and official. Walsh nodded slowly. I see. And when were you thinking? Soon as possible. That eager, are we? The Reverend's eyes twinkled. Well, I'll need to post bans for 3 weeks. That's the proper procedure, gives the community time to raise any objections. Objections? Elara asked. Standard practice. Ensures no one's being forced into anything, no legal impediments. Walsh pulled out a ledger, started writing. Though, in your case, I doubt there'll be any problems. The whole territory knows your story by now. Great, Rowan said flatly. Love being the subject of gossip. Gossip's just people trying to make sense of the world. You two did something extraordinary. Stood up to evil and won. That's the kind of story folks need to hear. Walsh finished writing, looked up. 3 weeks from today, then, Saturday afternoon. I'll keep it simple, just the vows and the blessing. Thank you, Alara said. We appreciate it. As they left the church, Rowan took her hand. Having second thoughts? Not even a little. You? Only about doing this in front of people. Never was one for being the center of attention. Too bad. You're marrying the woman who killed Garrett Finch. Attention comes with the territory. He groaned. Don't remind me. They spent the rest of the day in town, ordering supplies and fielding questions from curious neighbors. By the time they headed back to the ranch, Alara's face hurt from smiling. That wasn't so bad, she said as Red Hollow disappeared behind them. You say that now. Wait until the whole town shows up to watch us get married. Let them come. I'm not ashamed of this. Rowan glanced at her, something soft in his expression. No, you're not. That's one of the things I love about you. You don't do anything halfway. Learned from the best. The 3 weeks before the wedding passed faster than Alara expected. The ranch continued to take shape, new windows gleaming, doors hanging straight, the worst of the damage repaired. She and Rowan worked side by side, their partnership so natural now that they rarely needed words to coordinate. But beneath the routine, tension was building. Not between them, but in Alara herself. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was waiting for the other shoe to drop, that something else would come crashing down just when things were finally good. The nightmares didn't help. She'd wake gasping, Finch's face hovering in her mind's eye, the weight of the gun in her hand feeling more real than the bed beneath her. Rowan would be there every time, pulling her close, murmuring reassurances until her breathing steadied. It's getting worse, she admitted one night after a particularly bad episode. The dreams, I mean. I thought they'd fade by now. They will. Just takes time. He stroked her hair, his touch gentle. You've been so focused on the ranch, on keeping busy. Maybe your mind's just catching up to what happened. I don't want to think about it anymore. I just want to move forward. You can do both. Remember what happened, but don't let it define you. He pulled back enough to look at her. You're not just the woman who killed Finch. You're the woman who learned to shoot in 3 weeks, who rebuilt a ranch from rubble, who chose to stay when leaving would have been easier. You make it sound heroic. I was just surviving. Survival is heroic. Never let anyone tell you different. She nodded against his chest, letting his heartbeat anchor her. Tell me about the future. What you see for us. Rowan was quiet for a moment, thinking. I see the herd growing. New calves every spring. I see fixing up the house proper. Maybe adding another room, a real kitchen. I see you with a garden, teaching kids in town when they need it. He paused. I see us old and gray sitting on that porch watching the sunset, still together. That sounds good. Yeah, it does. The wedding day arrived clear and hot. Alara woke before dawn, nerves jangling despite her earlier confidence. She dressed carefully in the only good dress she owned, purchased with part of the reward money, simple blue cotton that Martha had helped her alter to fit properly. Martha had insisted on coming out the day before to help prepare, bringing her daughters and enough food to feed a small army. People will want to celebrate, she'd said firmly, and you can't have a wedding without a proper reception. Now, as Alara pinned up her hair with hands that trembled slightly, she could hear the sounds of the town assembling outside. Wagons pulling up. Voices calling greetings. The whole thing felt surreal. A knock on the door, then Martha's voice. You decent? Come in. Martha entered, took one look at Alara, and smiled. You look beautiful. I look nervous. That too. But mostly beautiful. She crossed to the window, peered out. Half the town's here already. Reverend Walsh is setting up. And Rowan, well, he looks like he might bolt any minute. Despite everything, Alara laughed. Should I be worried? Not a chance. That man looks at you like you hung the moon. He's not going anywhere. Martha turned back, her expression turning serious. I'm proud of you, you know, what you've built here, who you've become. I didn't do it alone. No, but you did the hardest part. You chose it. You chose to stay, to fight, to make a life here. That takes courage most people never find. She moved to the door, paused. Give me 5 minutes to make sure everything's ready, then come on out. Don't keep us waiting too long. It's hot as blazes out there. After Martha left, Ilara took a moment to look around the room. This space that had been a sick room, a battlefield command center, and now a dressing room. The bullet hole in the far wall that Otto the Glazier had missed. The floorboard she'd scrubbed until her knuckles bled. Home. She picked up the small bouquet of wildflowers that Martha had gathered that morning and walked to the door. Outside, the yard had been transformed. Chairs borrowed from the church lined up in rough rows. At the front, Reverend Walsh stood in his formal robes, looking slightly overwhelmed by the crowd. And beside him, looking deeply uncomfortable in a clean shirt with his hair actually combed, stood Rowan. He saw her and went very still. The nervous tension in his shoulders melted away, replaced by something that looked like wonder. Ilara walked toward him. No aisle, no formal processional, just her crossing the dusty yard to meet him. When she reached his side, he took her hand and squeezed. You look, he started, then stopped. Hell, I don't have words for how you look. You clean up pretty well yourself. Liar. But he was smiling. Reverend Walsh cleared his throat. Shall we begin? The ceremony was simple. Traditional vows spoken in voices that only shook a little. Rings that Rowan had somehow managed to acquire without her knowing. Simple bands of hammered silver. Nothing fancy, but solid and real. And then Walsh's pronouncement, his hand raised in blessing. By the authority vested in me by the territory and in the sight of this community, I declare you husband and wife. Rowan, you may kiss your bride. Rowan cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, gentle and reverent, like she was something precious. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, and when they finally broke apart, both of them were grinning like fools. Mrs. Cade, Rowan said, testing the words. Mr. Cade, she replied, though I'm keeping Voss, too. Ilara Voss Cade has a nice ring to it. Whatever makes you happy. The reception was chaotic and loud and perfect. People pressed in to offer congratulations, to share food and drink, to tell stories about Finch's demise that grew more exaggerated with each retelling. Someone had brought a fiddle, and before long, music filled the air. Sheriff Hayes cornered them near the punch bowl, looking pleased. Got news you might want to hear. Those 2 men who ran during the attack turned themselves in last week. Confessed to everything, the stage robberies, the murders, all of it. They'll hang next month. Rowan nodded slowly. So it's really over. It's really over. The Finch gang's finished. Hayes raised his glass. To justice. And to the 2 people who made it happen. They drank to that, and Ilara felt another piece of weight lift from her shoulders. It was done. Truly done. As the sun started to set and the crowd began to thin, Ilara found herself standing at the edge of the yard, looking out at the land she could now officially call hers. The desert stretched endlessly, beautiful in its harsh way, painted gold and crimson by the dying light. Rowan came up beside her, slipped an arm around her waist. What are you thinking? That 6 weeks ago I was dying out there, and now I'm here, married, home. It doesn't seem real. It's real. You made it real. He turned her to face him. We made it real. What happens now? Now? Now we live. We work the ranch. We build that future we talked about. We have fights and makeup. We get old together. He smiled. The boring, ordinary stuff that people dream about. Boring sounds perfect. Yeah, it does. They stood there as the stars emerged, one by one, watching the last of their wedding guests depart in a caravan of wagons and horses. When the final goodbye had been said and they were alone again, Rowan swept Ilara up in his arms. What are you doing? She laughed. Carrying my bride over the threshold. It's traditional. We've been living together for weeks. Doesn't matter, doing it properly now. He carried her into the house, and Ilara wrapped her arms around his neck, feeling safe and cherished and impossibly lucky. He set her down gently in the front room, and she took a moment to look around at the space they'd rebuilt together. Welcome home, Mrs. Cade, Rowan said softly. I've been home for a while now, but thank you anyway. He kissed her again, slower this time, and Ilara let herself get lost in it, in him, in the certainty that this was exactly where she belonged. Later, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Rowan's voice came quiet. I never thought I'd have this. A partner. Someone who understood what it meant to survive something and come out stronger. Neither did I. Thought I'd spend my whole life settling for less than I wanted. She traced idle patterns on his chest. Glad I was wrong. Me too. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, two people who'd found something worth fighting for and refused to let go. The weeks that followed settled into a new normal. Alara discovered she had a talent for managing the ranch's finances, for negotiating prices with buyers and keeping detailed records. Rowan focused on the livestock and land management, his years of experience showing in every decision. They were partners in the truest sense, equals who trusted each other completely. When they disagreed, they argued it out. When they agreed, they moved forward with confidence. And when the nightmares came, which they still did occasionally for both of them, they held each other until dawn. One afternoon, about a month after the wedding, a stranger rode up to the ranch. Alara tensed automatically, but the man's hands were empty and raised in peace. Looking for Alara Voss Cade, he called out. That's me, she said, stepping onto the porch with Rowan beside her. The man dismounted, pulled an envelope from his saddlebag. Got a letter for you, from back east. Alara took it, frowning. She didn't know anyone back east anymore. The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar, elegant script that spoke of education and money. She opened it carefully, read the contents, then read them again. What is it? Rowan asked. It's from Samuel Porter, the man I was supposed to marry. His expression hardened. What does he want? He's releasing his claim, says he heard about what happened with Finch, and She found the line, read it aloud. I recognize now that our arrangement was born of mutual desperation rather than genuine compatibility. You have clearly found a life more suited to your character, and I wish you well in it. She looked up. He's wishing me well. Decent of him. Yeah, it is. She folded the letter carefully, tucked it back in the envelope. That's the last piece, isn't it? The last connection to who I used to be. You regret it? How things turned out? Alara looked at him, at their ranch, at the life they'd built from nothing. Not for a second. Good. Because I'm not giving you back. She laughed, pulled him close. Wouldn't dream of asking you to. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Alara thought about the journey that had brought her here. The ambush. The desert. The collapse. Rowan finding her. The slow build of trust and partnership. The siege and the violence and the choice to stay. Every step had been hard. Every choice had carried weight. But each one had led her here. To this moment. To this man. To this life. What are you smiling about? Rowan asked. Just thinking about how lucky I am. Lucky? You almost died. Multiple times. I know, but I didn't. And everything that happened, all of it, it brought me here. To you. To this. She gestured at the ranch, at the land spreading out before them. I wouldn't change any of it. He was quiet for a moment, then said, You know what I think? I think you make your own luck. You survived the desert because you're stubborn. You survived Finch because you learned to fight. You're here because you chose to be. We're here, she corrected. We chose this. Together. Yeah, we did. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to purple to deep blue. Stars emerged one by one, the same stars that had watched Alara collapse in the desert all those weeks ago. But she wasn't that woman anymore. That woman had been running, had been afraid, had been resigned to a life she didn't want. This woman, Alara Voss Cade, was different. She'd learned to shoot, to fight, to stand her ground. She'd killed to protect what was hers. She'd chosen a life instead of settling for one. And she was just getting started. What do you think about teaching? She asked suddenly. Rowan looked at her, surprised. Teaching what? Reading, writing, arithmetic, basic stuff. Martha mentioned the town's been trying to get a proper school going, but they can't afford to bring in a teacher from back east, and there are kids out here who need education. You want to be a teacher. I want to help. Want to give something back to the community that accepted us. She turned to face him fully. I know it means time away from the ranch, but I think it's important. He considered it, then nodded slowly. Then you should do it. We can manage the ranch. We're doing fine already. And you're right, those kids need someone who understands what it's like to build something from nothing. You're sure? I'm sure. Besides, Mrs. Henshaw's right. This territory takes care of its own. And you're one of us now. He smiled. One of us who happens to be able to put a bullet through a bottle at 100 yards, but still one of us. Alara laughed. I'll probably mention that skill less when I'm teaching children. Probably wise. They made plans that night, sketching out possibilities. Alara would talk to the town council about starting a school. They'd build a small schoolhouse, maybe, or use the church. She could teach 3 days a week, leave the other days for the ranch. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. But it was real and possible, and theirs to build. Over the following months, the plan took shape. The town rallied behind the idea of a school, donated materials and labor. By early autumn, a small building stood at the edge of Red Hollow. One room, simple benches, a wood stove for winter. Alara's first day teaching was terrifying. She stood in front of 12 children ranging in age from 6 to 14, their faces looking up at her with expectation, and felt completely unprepared. Then she remembered Rowan's words. Survival is heroic. You make your own luck. She smiled at the children and said, Good morning. My name is Mrs. Cade, and we're going to learn some things together. But first, I want to hear about each of you. Your names, what you like to do, what you want to learn. The first hand shot up immediately, a girl of about 8 with freckles and braids. Is it true you killed Garrett Finch? Alara blinked. Yes, but that's not why we're here today. But how did you do it? Was it scary? Very scary. And I hope none of you ever have to do anything like that. She moved to sit on the edge of the desk. But I'll tell you this, I was able to do it because I learned things. How to think clearly under pressure, how to stay calm when I was terrified, how to trust my own judgment. And those are things you can learn too. Not for fighting, necessarily, but for life. The children stared at her, rapt. She had their attention completely. So yes, she continued, I'll tell you that story someday. But first, we're going to learn to read, because reading opens up whole worlds, and worlds are more important than one story about one fight. A boy in the back raised his hand. Will you teach us to shoot too? That's a conversation for your parents. I'm here to teach you letters and numbers. She stood, moved to the chalkboard. Now, who can tell me what letter this is? She drew an A, and the lesson began. Teaching was harder than Alara had expected, but more rewarding too. The children challenged her, asked questions she'd never considered, forced her to think about things in new ways. And slowly she watched them grow. Not just in knowledge, but in confidence. It reminded her of her own journey, how Rowan had taught her to shoot, and in doing so had taught her she was capable of more than she'd believed. Now she was doing the same for these children, showing them they could learn, could grow, could become whoever they wanted to be. At home, the ranch prospered. Rowan had expanded the herd as planned, and the new calves were thriving. They dug the second well, found water exactly where Rowan had predicted. The house now had a proper kitchen, thanks to a carpenter from town who'd traded labor for beef. Life was good. Hard, but good. One evening in late autumn, as the first cold winds began to blow across the desert, Alara came home from teaching to find Rowan standing in the yard, looking out at the sunset. Hey, she called, walking over to join him. Everything all right? Yeah, just thinking. About what? He slipped an arm around her waist, pulled her close. About how a year ago I was alone out here. No prospects, no future beyond the next season. And now, he gestured at the ranch, at everything they'd built. Now I have all this. We have all this. We have all this, he agreed. And I was thinking, maybe we should think about expanding in other ways too. She looked at him, saw the hope and nervousness in his expression. Are you asking what I think you're asking? Maybe, if you want. No pressure, just thought it might be nice, someday, to have kids running around, someone to leave all this to. Alara's throat tightened. She'd thought about it, of course. Had imagined a child with Rowan's eyes and her stubborn streak, but she'd been afraid to hope for it, afraid to want something that felt too good to be real. I'd like that, she said quietly. Someday soon, maybe. His smile was brilliant. Yeah? Yeah. He kissed her then, sweet and full of promise, and Alara felt the future unfold before them. Not perfect, never perfect, but real and solid in theirs. They'd survived the desert, survived the siege, survived everything the world had thrown at them. Whatever came next, they'd survive that too. Together. The first snow came early that year, dusting the desert in white that would be gone by noon. Alara stood at the kitchen window, watching the flakes drift down, and pressed a hand to her stomach where new life was just beginning to make itself known. She hadn't told Rowan yet, wanted to be absolutely certain before she said the words out loud and made them real. But the signs were there. The morning nausea that made coffee unbearable, the exhaustion that hit her like a wall by mid-afternoon, the way her body felt different in ways she couldn't quite name. A baby. Their baby. The thought filled her with equal parts joy and terror. Behind her, Rowan came in from the morning chores, stamping snow from his boots. Getting colder. We'll need to move the herd to the lower pasture before the real weather hits. She turned to face him, and he must have seen something in her expression because he stopped mid-motion. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. She took a breath. I'm pregnant. The words hung in the air between them. Rowan went very still, his face cycling through surprise, shock, and then something that looked like pure wonder. You're sure? He asked quietly. As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor, but yes, I'm sure. He crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her like she might break. How long? 2 months, maybe. It's early still. You should sit down, rest. You shouldn't be… She laughed, pulling back to look at him. I'm pregnant, not dying. I can still function. But you need to take it easy. No heavy lifting, no… Rowan. She cupped his face, forcing him to focus. I'm fine. We're fine. I'm not made of glass. He took a shaky breath, then nodded. I know. This is… terrifying? Yeah, that. He pressed his forehead to hers. But also the best news I've ever heard. They stood like that for a long moment, and Alara felt something settle deep in her chest. This was real. This was happening. In 6 months, give or take, they'd have a child. The thought should have been overwhelming. And it was. But it was also right. We need to tell people, Rowan said eventually. Martha will want to know. And you should see Doc Brennan. Make sure everything's… I will, but maybe we keep it quiet for a bit. Just until we're further along? He hesitated, then nodded. Whatever you want. But keeping it quiet proved harder than expected. Martha had eyes like a hawk and instincts honed by raising 5 children of her own. She took one look at Alara the next time they were in town and pulled her aside. You're pregnant, she said flatly. Alara blinked. How did you got… You've got the look, pale, tired, and you turned green when you walked past the butcher shop. Martha crossed her arms, but she was smiling. How far along? About 10 weeks. And you're feeling all right? No bleeding? No sharp pains? No, nothing like that. Just tired and nauseous. Martha's expression softened. That's normal. But you need to see Doc Brennan anyway. Get yourself checked proper. She paused. And you need to think about the school. 3rd trimester's going to be hard, and you can't be on your feet all day with a baby pressing on your bladder. Alara hadn't thought that far ahead. I can't just abandon the students. You're not abandoning anyone. You're having a baby. We'll find someone to take over when the time comes. Martha squeezed her shoulder. You've given this town plenty already. Let us give back. The doctor confirmed what Alara already knew. She was healthy, the baby was growing, everything was progressing normally. He gave her instructions about rest and nutrition, told her to avoid heavy work, and scheduled another appointment for a month out. You're lucky, he said as she was leaving. Lots of women out here don't have the support you do. A good husband, a community that cares. Makes all the difference. Alara thought about that on the ride home. Lucky. She'd used that word herself back when she and Rowan first got together. But luck implied chance, randomness, and nothing about her life here had been random. She'd made choices. Hard ones, scary ones. She'd chosen to stay when leaving would have been easier. Chosen to fight when running was safer. Chosen to build a life instead of just surviving one. And every choice had led her here. That night, lying in bed with Rowan's hand resting protectively on her stomach, she said, I'm scared. Of what? Of messing this up, being a terrible mother, not knowing what I'm doing. He was quiet for a moment. You think I'm not terrified? I don't know the first thing about babies. What if I drop it? What if I can't provide enough? What if we're both scared and we figure it out anyway? She turned to face him. We've survived worse than this. Having a baby isn't a siege. No, it's harder, because we can't shoot our way out of it. She smiled slightly. But we'll learn, same way we learned everything else. Together, he said. Together. The pregnancy progressed through winter and into early spring. Alara's body changed in ways that fascinated and frustrated her. Her clothes stopped fitting, her balance shifted. She got winded climbing stairs that she used to take two at a time. But she also felt the baby move for the first time. A flutter like butterfly wings that made her gasp and press a hand to her stomach. She watched her students' faces light up when she told them there would be a baby coming. She let Martha and the other women in town fuss over her, share advice and hand-me-down clothes and stories about their own pregnancies. She was building something bigger than just a family. She was building a community. The school thrived under her guidance. By spring, she had 18 students, and the town council was already talking about expanding the building. A young woman named Sarah Mills, fresh from a teaching college in Denver, arrived to help with the older students and learn the ropes before Alara went on leave. You've done amazing work here, Sarah said one afternoon, watching the children practice their letters. These kids are lucky to have you. I'm the lucky one, Alara replied. They gave me purpose when I needed it most. In late March, when Alara was about 6 months along and starting to feel the weight of the pregnancy in her back and hips, a letter arrived from the territorial governor's office. Rowan brought it in from town, looking confused. It's addressed to both of us, he said, handing it over. Alara opened it carefully, read the formal language, then read it again to make sure she understood. What is it? Rowan asked. They're giving us a commendation for exceptional courage in the face of danger and service to the territory. There's going to be a ceremony in the capital next month. Rowan's expression turned skeptical. They want us to travel 6 days while you're 7 months pregnant so they can give us a piece of paper? It's more than that. It's official recognition. And there's... She found the line again. A land grant. Another 160 acres adjoining our property. That got his attention. A land grant? Says here it's in recognition of our contribution to territorial security. She looked up, saw the calculation in his eyes. That's a lot of land, Rowan. Yeah, it is. He took the letter, studied it. But they can mail us the deed. We're not making that trip, not with you this far along. What if I want to go? Then I'd say you're being stubborn and foolish, and I'd refuse to let you. She raised an eyebrow. Let me? He had the grace to look chagrined. Poor choice of words. I'd strongly encourage you to reconsider. Better. She took the letter back, folded it carefully. I don't need a ceremony anyway. The land's what matters. More space for the herd, room to expand. Maybe build a proper barn. Maybe a bigger house too. Gonna need more space with a baby. They spent that evening planning, sketching additions to the house, talking about where to run new fence lines. It was good practical work that kept Alara's mind off the growing anxiety about the birth itself. Because that was coming, ready or not. In late April, when the desert was blooming with unexpected wildflowers after an unusually wet spring, the contractions started. Alara was in the garden, checking on the vegetables she'd planted, when the first pain hit, low and deep, unmistakable. She straightened slowly, breathing through it. Then another came, stronger. Rowan, she called. He appeared from the barn at a run, took one look at her face, and went pale. Is it? Yes. We need to get Martha and Doc Brennan. What followed was controlled chaos. Rowan rode for town at a pace that probably terrified his horse, while Alara focused on breathing and not panicking. Martha arrived first, took charge with the calm efficiency of someone who'd done this 5 times. How far apart are the pains? She asked, helping Alara into the house. Maybe 10 minutes? I don't know. I wasn't timing them. That's all right, we've got time. Martha got her settled in bed, started laying out supplies. Doc Brennan will be here soon. Until then, you just focus on breathing, deep and slow. The labor lasted through the night and into the next morning. It was pain like nothing Alara had experienced, worse than sunburn, worse than Finch's backhand, worse than anything. She screamed and swore and gripped Martha's hand hard enough to leave bruises. And through it all, Rowan was there, holding her other hand, wiping sweat from her forehead, murmuring encouragement that she barely heard over the roaring in her ears. "I can't do this," she gasped at one point, when the pain had her convinced she was dying. "Yes, you can," Martha said firmly. "You've done harder things than this." "Nothing's harder than this. You killed Garrett Finch while he had a gun to your spine. You can push a baby out." It was such a ridiculous comparison that Alara almost laughed. Almost. Then another contraction hit, and Doc Brennan was saying something about crowning, and Martha was telling her to push, and Rowan's hand was crushing hers while his other hand supported her shoulders. And then, after what felt like hours but was probably minutes, there was a cry, thin and reedy, and absolutely perfect. "It's a girl," Doc Brennan announced, holding up a tiny squalling infant covered in blood and fluid. "A healthy girl." Alara collapsed back against the pillows, shaking and exhausted and overwhelmed. The doctor cleaned the baby quickly, wrapped her in a blanket, and placed her on Alara's chest. She was impossibly small, red-faced and furious, with a shock of dark hair and eyes squeezed shut against the brightness. Her tiny hands waved in the air, grasping at nothing. "Hi," Alara whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Hi, baby." Rowan leaned over them both, his expression stunned. She's perfect. She's ours," Alara said, and started crying harder. They named her Clara, after Alara's mother who'd died when she was young. Clara Rose Cade, born at dawn, on the first day of May in a ranch house that still bore the scars of the battle that had made her parents who they were. The first weeks were brutal. Clara cried constantly, refused to sleep more than 2 hours at a stretch, and seemed to need constant feeding. Alara was exhausted to the point of delirium, her body still recovering from the birth, her mind foggy from lack of sleep. But every time she looked at her daughter, at the tiny fingers that gripped her thumb with surprising strength, at the way Clara's face relaxed into perfect peace when she finally fell asleep, Alara felt something she'd never felt before. Complete. Martha came by daily, bringing food and advice, and taking Clara for an hour so Alara could sleep. The other women in town took turns helping too, creating a rotation of support that Alara hadn't known to expect, but was deeply grateful for. "This is what community means," Martha said one afternoon, rocking a fussy Clara, while Alara ate the first hot meal she'd had in days. "We take care of each other. You gave us a school. We give you this." Rowan adapted to fatherhood with the same quiet determination he brought to everything. He learned to change diapers, to walk Clara around the house at 2 a.m. singing off-key lullabies, to read Alara's exhaustion and take the baby so she could rest. They were a family now, messy and imperfect and real. One evening in late summer, when Clara was 3 months old and starting to smile, Alara carried her daughter out to the porch, where Rowan sat watching the sunset. "Look," she said, settling beside him with Clara in her arms. "Your first sunset, baby girl." Clara blinked at the colors, her expression serious, like she was taking it all in. "What do you think she sees?" Rowan asked. "Everything. The whole world spread out in front of her." Alara adjusted Clara's blanket. "She gets to grow up here, safe, free, with choices we never had. We had choices, we just had to fight for them." "True," she leaned against his shoulder. "But she won't have to fight the same battles. We already won those for her." They sat in silence as the sky turned from gold to purple. Clara fell asleep against Alara's chest, her breathing soft and even. "You know what I was thinking about?" Alara said quietly. "About the day you found me. How close I came to dying out there." "Don't," Rowan said, his voice tight. "No, listen. If I died that day, if you'd ridden past, or if I'd given up an hour earlier, none of this would exist. Clara wouldn't exist. This life we built wouldn't exist." She looked at him. "Every terrible thing that happened, every fight and fear and moment I wanted to quit, it all led here. To this." "Are you saying you're glad the stage got attacked?" "No, I'm saying I'm glad I survived it. There's a difference." She shifted Clara slightly, careful not to wake her. "I used to think strength meant not being afraid, not feeling pain, just pushing through everything like it didn't matter. But that's not strength. That's numbness." "Then what is strength?" "Feeling it all. The fear, the pain, the grief, and choosing to keep going anyway. choosing to build something instead of just surviving. She smiled slightly. You taught me that, whether you meant to or not. Rowan's arm came around her shoulders. You taught me something too. What's that? That being alone wasn't strength either. It was just being alone. Real strength is letting people in, trusting them, building something together. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. You saved me as much as I saved you. They sat like that until the stars came out, three people bound together by choice and blood and love. The years that followed weren't easy. Nothing worth having ever was. The ranch had good years and bad years. Clara grew from an infant into a toddler with her mother's stubbornness and her father's quiet intensity. The school expanded, and Alara went back to teaching part-time, bringing Clara with her on days when Rowan had work that couldn't wait. There were droughts and storms, sick cattle and broken fences, nights when money was tight and the future looked uncertain, arguments about finances and parenting and whose turn it was to get up with Clara when she had nightmares. But there was also laughter. Holidays celebrated with the whole town, the pride of watching Clara take her first steps, say her first words, read her first sentence. The quiet satisfaction of seeing the ranch prosper, the herd grow, the land thrive under their care. And through it all, Alara and Rowan held on to each other. Not perfectly. They still fought, still had moments of frustration and miscommunication. But they always came back to center, always remembered what they'd built and why it mattered. On Clara's 5th birthday, they threw a party that half the town attended. The yard filled with children playing, adults talking, food and laughter and celebration. Alara stood at the edge of it all, watching her daughter run wild with her friends, and felt Rowan's presence beside her. She's happy, he said. Yeah, she is. Alara smiled. We did good. We did. He took her hand, laced their fingers together. You ever think about what might have been? If you'd made it to Covenant Springs, married Samuel Porter? Sometimes, usually when I'm exhausted and covered in mud and wondering why I chose this life. And then I look at Clara, at you, at everything we've built, and I realize I didn't choose this life. I chose us. There's a difference. He pulled her close, and they stood together watching their daughter play, watching their community celebrate, watching the sun paint the desert in shades of gold. This was what remained after all the violence and fear and pain. This moment, this family, this life they'd carved out of nothing and defended with everything they had. Alara thought about the woman she'd been, desperate and lost, stumbling through the desert toward a future she didn't want. That woman was gone. She'd died in the sand and been reborn in this place, forged by fire into someone stronger. Someone who knew that strength wasn't about never falling, it was about getting back up. Someone who understood that survival wasn't the goal. Living was. And she was living now, fully, completely, without reservation or regret. That night, after the party ended and Clara was asleep, and the house was finally quiet, Alara stood at the bedroom window looking out at the stars. Rowan came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist. What are you thinking about? He asked. Everything. Nothing. She leaned back against him. Just grateful. For all of it. The good and the bad, and everything in between. Even Garrett Finch? She considered that. Even him. Because beating him taught me I was capable of more than I knew. And that lesson, that's something I can pass on to Clara. What lesson? That the world doesn't owe you anything. That if you want something, you have to fight for it. But also, that you don't have to fight alone. She turned in his arms to face him. That the people who stand beside you matter as much as what you're fighting for. Rowan's eyes crinkled at the corners. That's pretty wise. I have my moments. He kissed her, slow and sweet, and Alara let herself get lost in it. In him. In the certainty that this was exactly where she was meant to be. Outside, the desert wind picked up, carrying with it the smell of sage and possibility. Somewhere out there, other people were struggling, fighting their own battles, making their own choices. Alara hoped they found what she'd found. Not the specific details, the ranch, the husband, the daughter, but the feeling beneath it all. The feeling of being exactly who you were meant to be. Of fighting for something worth fighting for. Of building a life instead of just surviving one. She'd been broken down to nothing and built herself back stronger. She'd survived the desert and the siege and everything that came after. She'd learned that strength came in many forms, the strength to fight when necessary, but also the strength to forgive, to love, to trust, to hope. And she'd learned the most important lesson of all, that second chances were real, that you could collapse in the dust and still rise again, that who you were didn't have to be who you'd always be. That change was possible, growth was possible, redemption was possible, if you were brave enough to reach for it. Alara Voss Cade was brave enough. She'd proven that 100 times over, and she would keep proving it every day for the rest of her life, because that was what survivors did. They survived, and then they thrived, and they never, ever forgot the price they'd paid for the privilege. The desert had tried to claim her once. It had failed. And now, standing in her home with her family sleeping peacefully and her future stretching bright before her, Alara knew with absolute certainty that it would never claim her. She belonged to this land now, and it belonged to her forever.